Hello, this is Paul Chek. Today I'd like to share a few tips on grips, particularly when you're doing pulling exercises such as lat pull downs and chin-ups, but it can be applied to other types of pulling. If we look at the shoulder complex, we have what's called a force couple relationship. A force couple happens whenever there's two equal but opposite actions to produce a common goal. So for example, if you abduct your arm, the upper trapezius muscle helps superiorly rotate the scapula. The middle trapezius and lower trapezius actually act to inferiorly rotate it. So just like when you're turning your car, if you're turning your steering wheel, you're pushing with one hand and pulling with another hand to create the common objective, in this case of making a right-hand turn. So there's quite a complex interaction around the shoulder joint mechanism and the scapula to make these movements happen, because if the timing's not correct, you can get impingement of the head of the humerus on the acromion, pinch the supraspinatus tendon, and get all kinds of shoulder problems, of which I've seen countless cases of. What's key though is if you look at the analysis of human movement of the shoulder, it shows that when we initiate abduction, raising the arm away from the midline, there's what's called a setting phase, and that's where the muscles around the scapula hold the scapula still so that the supraspinatus and deltoids can initiate the abduction movement, and then they begin to work in concert to create that common movement of abducting or raising the arm above the head. So initially, there's only about 20 degrees of movement before the scapula sets itself, and then there's a concentration of movement from the whole force couple. Yet research shows in flexion, that setting phase doesn't occur till about 60 degrees. So as you're raising your arm in flexion, the scapula's got a lot more freedom to move. In translation, that means that abduction, which has a much earlier setting phase, is a more complex movement. It has to coordinate the movement carefully much sooner than it does in flexion. Now there's a lot of anatomy I'm leaving out just for brevity here, but that translates into exercise in a gym with an awareness that we need to do our pulling exercises so that the most complex grip maneuvers or things that require horizontal abduction come first. So now I'll just demonstrate how I would encourage people to organize their workouts when they want to do multiple grips in pulling. So as a general rule of thumb, if you're going to do pulling exercises, you want to orchestrate your sets so that first you do your prone grip pulling. That's the most complex movement for the body to orchestrate. Then you're going to do reverse grips, which is the next most complicated, then neutral grip, which is relatively the least complex. I'll give you an example of that. The key point I'm trying to make here is if you do, say, a V-handle lat pull down, then go to a reverse grip, then do a prone grip, your nervous system is going to fatigue, and by the time you get to the prone grip, the quality of movement is going to go down. And if you have other problems that you're unaware of, which most people do, it's going to magnify them, and you're far more likely to get yourself an impingement syndrome or disrupt what's called scapulohumeral or glenohumeral, scapulohumeral, and glenohumeral timing, which is the timing of the scapula on the thorax and the timing in relationship between the humerus and the scapula. And these timing dysfunctions are usually the beginnings of what turns out to be an unexpected labral tear or rotator cuff impingement or tear or an impingement syndrome. So I'll demonstrate both on a chin-up and a high cable pull how you could ideally orchestrate to get maximum performance, minimize risk of injury. And remember, if you do the most complex pulling exercises first, as you fatigue, the easier ones are such that you still can do them quite well with lower neurological energy because they require less neurological energy. So first we would jump up and do a prone grip, chin up, first, till your sets are done. Then we would switch to a reverse grip, and that might be your next set, or if you're doing 6 sets, you'd do 2, 2, and 2. Then you could switch to a neutral grip, and so in the neutral grip, you'd bring your head up and through, and up and through. That's the easiest movement for the nervous system to orchestrate. With a cable, if you're going to do a prone pulling position, you would pull this way. Then your next set or 2, however you break your sets up, would be a reverse grip. And then your neutral grip, you'd put your thumb up, and that would be primarily shoulder extension. Whereas with the prone grip, you're getting horizontal abduction, which is quite complex to orchestrate. Now, just to add to that, when you're doing a prone grip, such as this, chin up pulling, or pulling so your arms in horizontal abduction, as you pull, it opens your chest, so you should couple that with inhalation, because inhalation excites the extensor muscles. But when you're going to a reverse grip or a neutral grip, you're actually doing shoulder extension, which is neurologically and kinesiologically coupled with trunk flexion, which is coupled with exhalation. So that's a big performance enhancer, just to know that if you're inhaling when you're doing horizontal adduction or flexion, or you're pulling with the grip prone, or pulling in a prone grip because you're bringing your chest to the bar, those are all inhalation movements. If you're exhaling while you're doing that, you're actually telling the brain to fire the flexors, which causes neurological antagonism to the muscles you're working. Thanks for joining me today for Tips on Grips with Paul Chek. I'll see you next time.